Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the fading glow of a Viking evening, where the last threads of sunlight stretch across a cold northern sky and disappear behind dark, rolling hills. You stand just outside a longhouse, the air sharp enough to wake every nerve in your body. And yet, somehow, you already feel a kind of comfort waiting inside. Smoke curls lazily from the roof vent, carrying with it the smell of wood fire and something faintly savory, like roasted meat lingering in the air. It's not exactly five-star luxury. But compared to sleeping outside in the Scandinavian wilderness, this is basically a spa retreat. And here's the thing, you probably won't survive this. Not because anything dramatic is about to happen, but because your modern sleep habits? Completely unprepared. No memory foam mattress, no blackout curtains, no white noise rain playlist. Just you, a wooden structure, a fire, and about 20 people who all snore with impressive confidence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and the local time where you are right now. It's always fascinating to see where in the world you're drifting off with these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck your head and step inside the longhouse, and immediately, everything changes. The cold releases its grip on your skin, replaced by a thick, almost enveloping warmth, where the interior is dim but alive, lit by the flickering glow of a central hearth that stretches down the middle of the room. Shadows dance across timber walls, beams overhead creaking softly as if the building itself is settling in for the night. This is a Viking longhouse, home, shelter, and sleeping quarters all in one. Archaeological finds across Scandinavia, particularly in places like Norway and Denmark, show that these structures could stretch up to 75 meters long, housing extended families, livestock, and sometimes even guests under one roof. It's less private bedroom and more cozy human hive. You pause for a moment, letting your eyes adjust. Along the sides of the longhouse, raised wooden platforms line the walls. These will become sleeping spaces later. Right now, though, they're covered with tools, folded cloaks, and the occasional person lounging in that half-tired, half-content way people do at the end of a long day. The air smells like smoke, wool, and earth. Not unpleasant, just honest. There's a low hum of voices, not loud or chaotic, but steady and warm. Conversations overlap gently, like waves rolling against each other. No one seems rushed. No one is staring at a glowing rectangle in their hand. Already, you can feel your shoulders drop a little. Historians still argue whether longhouses were strictly divided by social rank, or if most people experience this kind of shared space equally. Some evidence suggests subtle hierarchies, certain areas reserved for higher status individuals. But from where you stand, it feels like everyone is part of the same slow unwinding. You take a few careful steps forward, the boots pressing softly against the packed earth floor. The fire crackles, sending up occasional sparks that vanish before reaching the roof vent. It's positioned cleverly, right in the center, so heat spreads evenly, making the longhouse far warmer than you'd expect, given the harsh Nordic climate outside. And here's a surprisingly practical detail: that smoke lingering in the air. It's not just a side effect. It actually helps preserve the wooden structure and keeps insects away. A built-in pest control system, courtesy of mild indoor smoke inhalation. Cozy, with a hint of danger. Somewhere nearby, someone shifts a wooden bowl. You catch a glimpse of the last bits of dinner being cleared away. Simple food, but filling. Viking diets often included things like barley, fish, and preserved meats, all of which provided the energy needed to survive long, cold nights. Nothing fancy, but very effective. And honestly, after a day of physical labor, even the simplest meal probably feels like a feast. You move closer to the side benches, running your hand lightly across the wood. It's worn smooth from years of use. These platforms aren't just for sitting, they're where you'll eventually lie down. No separate bedroom, no door to close, just a shared space where sleep happens as naturally as breathing. There's something strangely calming about that. You notice how the rhythm of the room is already slowing. Conversations are becoming softer, more spaced out. A few people stretch, rolling their shoulders, letting out quiet sighs that signal the day is ending. It's not announced. There's no bedtime. It just happens. Awesome, and that might be the first thing that surprises you. In your world, sleep is scheduled, optimized, tracked by apps. Here, it's instinctive, guided by darkness, warmth, and the simple fact that your body is tired. You sit down carefully on one of the platforms, feeling the solid support beneath you. It's not plush, but it's not uncomfortable either. Especially with layers, animal skins, wool blankets, maybe a bit of straw underneath. You'll soon realize Vikings knew exactly how to make these spaces work. A faint draft slips through the structure, just enough to keep the air from becoming stifling. The balance is delicate. Too much ventilation, and you lose heat. Too little, and the smoke becomes overwhelming. Yet somehow, through generations of building and rebuilding, they've figured it out. Another voice drifts past you, low and almost drowsy. Someone chuckles softly. The kind of laugh that doesn't demand attention, just exists for a moment and fades. And then there's the fire. Always the fire. It becomes the heartbeat of the room, its crackling rhythm steady and reassuring. Every so often, a log shifts, sending up a brief burst of sparks and light. Your eyes follow it, and for a second, you feel completely anchored, present in a way that's hard to replicate in modern life. A quirky detail you might not expect. Some longhouses even housed animals at one end, particularly during colder months. Cows, goats, maybe a few sheep. Not exactly ideal if you're sensitive to farmyard aromas, but their body heat added to the overall warmth. Think of it as medieval central heating, with occasional mooing. Historians still argue whether this practice was common across all regions or more of a seasonal adaptation. But either way, it paints a very clear picture. Vikings were practical above all else. You lean back slightly, resting your hands behind you. The wood creaks softly in response, not protesting, just acknowledging your presence. Around you, people continue their slow descent into rest. No one is rushing you. No one expects anything. And for the first time in a while, you realize you're not thinking about tomorrow. Not really. There's no endless to-do list hovering in your mind. No notifications waiting to be checked. Just the quiet understanding that the day is done. Outside, the wind brushes against the longhouse walls, a distant reminder of the world beyond. But inside, everything feels contained, safe even. You take a deeper breath. Smoke, warmth, wool. It settles in your chest in a way that feels grounding, almost meditative. And as the light continues to dim and the voices soften further, you begin to understand something unexpected about Viking bedtime traditions. They're not just about survival. They're about easing into rest, together. You remain seated along the wooden platform, letting the warmth of the longhouse settle deeper into your bones. The fire continues its steady rhythm, And now that your eyes have fully adjusted, you begin to notice something more subtle. Not just the space itself, but how people move within it. Nothing feels separate. There are no clear boundaries between living room, kitchen, or bedroom. Everything overlaps. A few moments ago, someone was eating where you're now sitting. Soon, someone else will sleep here. Life doesn't transition between rooms. It simply shifts shape within the same shared space. And somehow, it works. A woman nearby folds a thick wool cloak with slow, practiced motions, her fingers moving almost automatically. Across from her, someone leans back against the wall, already half asleep, head tilted slightly to one side. No one tells him to go to bed. No one dims the lights. Because there are no lights to dim. Just the gradual fading of firelight and the quiet agreement that the day is ending. You notice how close everyone is. Not uncomfortably close, but undeniably near. Shoulders brush occasionally. Someone's foot nudges a wooden bowl, and another person casually moves it aside without even looking. There's an unspoken coordination here, a shared awareness that feels almost instinctive. Modern, you might be thinking. Where's the personal space? Yeah, about that. Privacy in the Viking Age is more of a concept than a reality. Archaeological evidence from sites like Borg in Norway suggests that entire households, extended families, workers, possibly even travelers, would share these longhouses. Sleeping, eating, talking, all within a few meters of each other. And yet, rather than chaos, what you feel is a kind of quiet harmony. Historians still argue whether this level of communal living strengthened social bonds or simply reflected necessity. But as you sit here, it's hard not to feel that constant proximity creates something deeper than convenience. It creates familiarity, predictability, a sense that you're not alone, even when you're silent. You shift slightly, adjusting your position, and notice how the wooden platform retains a bit of warmth from the day. It's subtle, but it matters. Every detail here seems to serve a purpose, even if no one explicitly points it out. Another small, almost humorous realization hits you. If someone snores tonight, everyone hears it. No earbuds, no escape. Just a full, immersive audio experience. Somewhere to your left, a low conversation continues. Two voices, barely above a whisper now. You can't make out every word, but the tone is gentle, unhurried. It's not about exchanging important information. It's about winding down, letting thoughts drift out of the mind and into the air. And that's when you start to notice the rhythm. People aren't all going to sleep at once. Instead, they peel away gradually. One person stretches and lies down. Another follows a few minutes later. Someone else adjusts their cloak, tucking it around their shoulders before reclining against the wall. It's like watching a slow tide come in. No signal, no announcement. Just a shared understanding that the night has begun. You glance toward the center of the longhouse again. The fire has settled into a lower, steadier burn. Earlier, it was lively, crackling, popping, throwing sparks. Now, it's calmer, controlled, almost as if it too is preparing for rest. This isn't accidental. Maintaining the fire overnight was crucial. Vikings didn't let it burn out completely. Relighting it from scratch in the cold morning would be difficult and time-consuming. Instead, they banked the fire, covering embers with ash to preserve heat. A quiet, glowing core that would last until dawn. A sleeping fire in a way. And just like that, the entire longhouse mirrors it. Everyone settling into a slower, softer state, but not fully extinguished. You lean back a little more, resting your shoulders against the timber wall. It's solid, reassuring. The kind of structure that has stood through countless nights like this one. Wind, snow, rain. It's held firm. There's comfort in that. A quirky detail you might not expect. In some Viking communities, people believe that sleeping too far from others could make you more vulnerable, not just physically, but spiritually. Isolation wasn't just lonely, it was potentially dangerous. Being part of the group, even in sleep, offered a kind of protection. Whether that belief was widespread or not is still debated. But sitting here now, surrounded by quiet breathing and soft movement, you can see the appeal. There's a safety in numbers, even if one of those numbers occasionally kicks you in their sleep. You notice a child curled up near one of the adults already fast asleep. No bedtime story read from a book, no nightlight glowing softly in the corner. Just presence, warmth, the steady rhythm of voices fading into silence. And perhaps that's the real difference. Sleep here isn't an isolated event. It's not something you retreat into alone. It's something you arrive at, together. You adjust your position again, stretching your legs slightly. The surface beneath you is firm, but with the added layers you've seen, furs, cloth, maybe straw, it's clear that comfort is built piece by piece. Not luxurious, but effective. And honestly, after a full day of physical activity, you suspect it wouldn't take much to fall asleep here. Your body doesn't need convincing. It just needs the chance. Across the room, someone lets out a long, slow exhale. Another shifts, pulling a cloak tighter. The sounds are small, almost insignificant, but together they form a kind of background hum, like a living, breathing lullaby. No music, no guided meditation, just people. You find yourself listening more closely now. The fire, the faint wind outside, the occasional creak of wood as the structure settles. It's not silent, but it's consistent. Predictable. And in that predictability, your mind begins to relax. Modern silence can feel empty, almost unsettling. This feels full, but not overwhelming. Just enough to keep you grounded. Historians still argue whether Viking sleep patterns followed a strict schedule or adapted fluidly to seasonal light changes. But one thing seems clear. Their evenings weren't rushed. There was time to transition, time to let the day fade naturally. And you can feel that happening to you now. Your thoughts slow, your breathing deepens. Even the awareness of being in a completely different time and place begins to soften, replaced by something simpler. You're warm. You're still. You're surrounded by the quiet presence of others who are doing exactly the same thing. Letting go of the day. And without anyone saying it, without any clear dividing line between awake and asleep, the longhouse continues its gentle drift into night. You don't quite notice when your body shifts from simply sitting to settling. At some point, without ceremony, a wooden bowl is passed near you, one of the last quiet movements of the evening. The final traces of food linger, and you realize that what you're witnessing isn't just people getting ready for bed. It's something more gradual, more organic. Dinner here doesn't end with a clear finish. It dissolves into rest. You lean forward slightly, watching as someone scrapes the last bits from a pot near the hearth. The smell is faint now, but still present. Earthy, warm, filling. Viking meals were rarely extravagant, but they were deeply practical. Archaeological findings show diets centered around barley porridge, dried fish, root vegetables, and occasionally meat. especially during colder months or after successful hunts. Simple fuel. Exactly what the body needs before sleep. And unlike modern dinners, often rushed, eaten while distracted, this one has unfolded slowly. People have eaten at their own pace, talked in between bites, paused when they felt like it. No one counted calories. No one checked the time. You might be thinking, where's dessert? Well, if you're lucky, maybe a bit of honey. If not, congratulations, you've just experienced a sugar-free lifestyle enforced by geography. Someone nearby lifts a drinking horn, taking the final sip of what's likely ale. Not the strong festival kind, but a weaker brew, common in daily life. Safer than water in many cases, and just enough to soften the edges of the day without turning the longhouse into a chaotic party. You watch as the horn is set down, gently, deliberately. That's another thing you notice. Nothing is abrupt. Movements are slower now, intentional, as if everyone understands that this transition matters, that rushing it would somehow break the rhythm. You shift again, drawing your legs closer. The warmth from the fire has settled into the floor, into the wood, into the very air around you. It's not overwhelming, just steady, reliable, a kind of quiet reassurance. Historians still argue whether Vikings followed structured meal times or adapted fluidly depending on daylight and labor demands. But what seems consistent is this. The evening meal wasn't just about eating. It was about closing the day. You glance toward the hearth again. Someone is carefully adjusting the fire, not feeding it wildly, but guiding it into a slower burn. Large flames are no longer needed. What matters now is longevity, keeping enough heat to carry everyone through the night. There's something almost symbolic about that. Earlier, the fire was active, energetic, mirroring the work of the day. Now, it's calmer, controlled, like a body preparing for sleep. And you, without realizing it, are doing the same. A faint stretch runs through your shoulders. Not the dramatic kind, just a small release of tension. The kind you don't even notice until it's already happening. Across from you, someone begins laying out sleeping materials. A thick animal hide is spread over the wooden platform, followed by a folded wool blanket. It's not luxurious, but it's layered, thoughtful. Vikings understood insulation extremely well. Animal furs trapped heat, wool retained warmth even when damp, and straw, often used beneath bedding, provided both cushioning and an extra layer of thermal protection. It's a system built on experience, trial, error, and very cold winters. A quirky detail you might not expect. Some bedding materials weren't just for comfort, they were also chosen for their scent. Certain plants, like herbs or dried grasses, could be added to straw to create a more pleasant sleeping environment. Not quite lavender-scented candles, but definitely an early version of sleep optimization. You watch as the bedding is smoothed out with a few simple gestures. No fuss, no rearranging pillows for the perfect angle. Just enough preparation to make the space ready. It's practical, but also quietly caring. Someone else nearby pulls a cloak tighter around their shoulders, then slowly reclines, using a folded garment as a makeshift pillow. Another person follows, lying on their side, facing the warmth of the room rather than the outer wall. Positions matter here. Sleeping closer to the center means more warmth. Closer to the edges, it gets cooler. Subtle choices, shaped by years of habit. You shift your own position again, imagining where you might lie down. Instinctively, you lean slightly inward, toward the fire, toward the group. Not because anyone told you to, but because it feels right. Safer, warmer, more human. There's a soft clatter as a wooden utensil is finally set aside. That might be the last one. The meal is over. But instead of a clear ending, it just fades. Conversations thin out. Movements slow even further. The energy of the room drops into something softer, heavier, like a blanket settling over everything. And then you notice something unexpected. No one is hungry, not in the way you might expect after a long day. Because the meal wasn't just about quantity, it was about timing. Eating at the right moment, in the right environment, with the right pace. Giving the body exactly what it needs to transition into rest. Modern science would probably approve. Though, to be fair, modern science would also suggest slightly less indoor smoke. You let out a quiet breath, your gaze drifting lazily across the room. The firelight flickers, casting long shadows that stretch and shrink with each subtle movement of flame. It's hypnotic. And without realizing it, your eyes linger a little longer each time they blink. A child stirs nearby, then settles again. Someone shifts their weight, the wood beneath them creaking softly in response. These sounds, once noticeable, are becoming part of the background now. No longer interruptions, but elements of a steady, comforting rhythm. Historians still argue whether Viking evenings included structured rituals beyond meals and storytelling. But here, in this moment, it feels like the ritual is simply this: slowing down, letting go. You lean back once more, allowing your body to rest more fully against the wooden support. The warmth, the quiet, the absence of urgency. It all begins to blend into something almost meditative. And then, a small thought drifts through your mind. There's nothing left to do. No dishes waiting in a sink, no emails to answer, no, just one more thing pulling you back into activity. The day has been completed, not carried over. And that might be the coziest part of all, because as the last traces of movement fade and the longhouse settles deeper into stillness, you realize that sleep isn't something you have to chase here. It's something that arrives naturally, right on time. The last movements of the evening fade so gradually that you almost miss the moment when doing turns into simply being. You remain where you are, half reclined now, watching as the longhouse slips into a quieter rhythm. The fire has settled into a low, steady glow, and the conversations that once overlapped gently are now fewer, softer, more spaced apart. But they're not gone. Not yet. A voice begins somewhere across the room. Low, measured, almost melodic. You can't catch every word at first, but the tone alone draws your attention. It's not urgent, not loud. It carries the kind of cadence that doesn't demand listening, but invites it. Storytelling. You shift slightly, just enough to face in that direction, your body instinctively responding to the change. Others do the same, not all at once, but gradually. A few people who had already begun to lie down tilt their heads or open their eyes just a little. This, it seems, is part of the rhythm too. Viking storytelling wasn't reserved for grand occasions. While epic sagas were certainly shared in larger gatherings, smaller, quieter stories filled the everyday spaces, especially in the evening. Oral tradition was the backbone of their culture, passing down history, values, and identity long before anything was written. And here, in this dim, firelit space, it feels less like a performance and more like a shared exhale. The speaker's voice flows steadily, rising and falling in a gentle pattern. You catch fragments now. Names, places, something about a journey across water. It doesn't matter if you understand every detail. The rhythm itself is enough. It's soothing, predictable, almost like a lullaby disguised as a story. Historians still argue whether these nightly stories were structured teaching tools or simply a natural extension of social bonding. But as you listen, it feels less like instruction and more like connection. A way to end the day, not in silence, but in shared imagination. You notice how the fire responds, flickering in time with the voice, shadows stretching across the beams above. The entire space seems to breathe with the story, expanding and contracting with each pause, each quiet emphasis. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the energy of the room lowers again. Someone shifts beside you, settling deeper into their bedding. Another person lets out a quiet hum, maybe agreement, maybe just contentment. There's no applause, no interruption, just a continuous flow. You rest your head lightly against the wall, letting the sound wash over you. Your eyes don't need to stay open anymore, not fully. You can listen just fine like this. A quirky detail you might not expect. Some Viking stories included practical knowledge hidden within them. Navigational tips, warnings about certain landscapes, even advice about seasons and survival. It's like bedtime storytelling, but occasionally doubling as a survival guide. Once upon a time, don't walk into that valley during winter or you will absolutely regret it. Comforting. You feel your breathing begin to match the pace of the voice. Slow even, unforced. The kind of rhythm that doesn't need attention. It just happens. And that's when you realize something else. There's no abrupt end to the story either. No clear conclusion. It simply trails. The voice softens. Pauses grow longer. Sentences stretch out, then gently dissolve into silence. Not because the story's finished, but because the night is, and everyone understands. No one asks for the ending. No one needs it. Because the purpose was never the destination. It was the drifting. You let your eyes close fully now, just for a moment. The darkness behind your eyelids feels warm, not empty. The firelight still flickers faintly through, casting a soft orange glow that pulses gently with each shift of flame. You're aware of the space around you, but only loosely now. The sounds have blended together. The fire, the quiet breathing, the faint wind outside brushing against the structure. It's all become one continuous backdrop. Steady, reassuring. Historians still argue whether Viking oral traditions influenced sleep quality or emotional well-being. But sitting here, it's hard not to feel that this kind of ending to the day carries a certain calm with it. There's no abrupt silence, no sudden transition from noise to nothing, just a gradual fading, like walking into sleep rather than falling into it. You shift slightly, adjusting your position as your body relaxes further. The wooden surface beneath you no longer feels firm. It feels supportive, familiar even, despite the fact that you've only been here a short time. That's the effect of repetition, of shared rhythm. Even one evening is enough to start understanding it. Somewhere nearby, the storyteller has gone quiet now. Not in a noticeable way, just less present. Their voice has dissolved into the same stillness as everything else. And no one replaces it, because it's no longer needed. A final soft movement, someone pulling a blanket closer, another adjusting their head against a folded cloak. These are the last small echoes of wakefulness, fading one by one. You take a slow breath in. The air is warmer now, slightly heavier, but not uncomfortable. Just enough to make you feel grounded, held in place. And as you exhale, you realize that your thoughts have thinned. There's no running commentary in your mind anymore. No jumping from one idea to the next. Just a quiet, steady presence. You're here. That's enough. A faint crackle from the fire draws your attention one last time. You don't open your eyes fully, just enough to catch the glow. The embers pulse softly, alive but calm, like a heartbeat slowing down. It mirrors you. Or maybe you're mirroring it. Either way, the connection is there. And in that shared stillness, surrounded by the quiet presence of others, guided gently by the fading echoes of stories, you feel yourself drifting just a little further. Not asleep. Not yet. But very, very close. You don't remember deciding to lie down. It just happens. One moment you're leaning against the wall, drifting somewhere between listening and resting. And the next, your body shifts, guided more by instinct than intention. You ease yourself onto the wooden platform, turning slightly onto your side, adjusting your weight until it feels right. Not perfect, but right. The surface beneath you is firm, undeniably so. But it's layered. Someone, perhaps the same person you saw earlier, has already prepared the space. Beneath you, there's a thin bed of straw, slightly uneven, but surprisingly forgiving. On top of that, a thick animal hide softens the edges, its texture worn smooth from years of use. And finally, a wool blanket rests over it all, trapping warmth in quiet, efficient layers. It's not luxurious, but it's thoughtful, and that makes all the difference. You shift your shoulders slightly, testing the arrangement. The straw compresses just enough to cradle your weight. Not quite a mattress, but not far off either, if you squint your expectations a little. A faint, almost amused thought crosses your mind. Somewhere in the future, people will pay a lot of money for something called natural bedding. Congratulations, you've arrived early. Archaeological evidence from Viking settlements shows that straw bedding was common, often replaced periodically to maintain cleanliness and comfort. Animal furs, especially sheep or deer, added insulation, while wool blankets provided a final layer that retained heat even in damp conditions. It's a system built for survival, but also, quietly, for rest. You reach for a folded piece of cloth nearby, perhaps a spare garment, and place it beneath your head. It's not quite a pillow, but it works. Vikings didn't have standardized sleeping cushions, but they improvised constantly, using whatever materials were available. Function over form, always. Around you, others have already settled into their own spaces. Some lie flat on their backs, hands resting loosely at their sides. Others curl slightly, knees drawn in, conserving warmth. A few remain propped against the wall, half sitting, as if sleep might come to them in stages. There's no single, correct way to sleep here, just whatever works. You pull a portion of the wool blanket over yourself, noticing how quickly it traps the heat your body has already begun to generate. It's immediate, subtle, but noticeable. The kind of warmth that doesn't overwhelm. It just stays with you. A quiet, steady companion. Historians still argue whether Viking bedding varied significantly based on social status, or if most people experienced similar sleeping conditions. Wealthier households may have had access to thicker furs or finer wool, but the overall structure remained consistent. Layered, practical, effective. And honestly, lying here now, it doesn't feel lacking. It feels sufficient. More than that, it feels grounding. A soft rustle nearby catches your attention. Someone is adjusting their own bedding, pulling a hide closer, tucking it around their shoulders. The movement is slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic in its simplicity. No one rushes into sleep. They ease into it. You shift again, just slightly, finding that small pocket of comfort where your body stops asking for adjustments. It takes a moment, but once you find it, there's a noticeable release, a subtle signal that you've arrived. This is your spot for the night. A quirky detail you might not expect. Some Viking beds, particularly in more permanent settlements, were slightly elevated not just for comfort, but to avoid drafts and pests. Even a few inches off the ground could make a significant difference in warmth and cleanliness. So yes, this wooden platform, it's actually an upgrade. You take a slow breath in, feeling the layered warmth settle around you. The fire's heat reaches you gently, balanced by the slight coolness near the outer wall. It creates a kind of natural temperature gradient, one that your body adjusts to without effort. It's not controlled, but it's balanced. And that balance is enough. You notice how the sounds of the longhouse have shifted again. Earlier, there were voices, movement, the occasional clatter of objects. Now, it's quieter, not silent, but softer. Breathing, the faint crackle of embers, the occasional shift of fabric or straw. It's a different kind of soundscape now. One that doesn't demand attention. It just exists. You pull the blanket a little higher, covering your shoulder more fully. The wool brushes against your skin, coarse but warm, not uncomfortable, just real. Everything here is real. Nothing is engineered for perfection, and maybe that's why it works. Historians still argue whether Vikings slept in long, uninterrupted stretches or followed a segmented sleep pattern, waking briefly during the night before returning to rest. But lying here, it feels like sleep wouldn't be a rigid block of time anyway. It would be fluid, like everything else. You shift your head slightly against the folded cloth beneath you, adjusting it into a more comfortable position. It holds. Not perfectly, but well enough. And that's the theme, isn't it? Well enough. You glance once more toward the center of the longhouse, your eyes barely opening. The fire is now a low glow, embers pulsing softly. Shadows are longer, less defined. The space feels smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way that everything is drawn inward. Closer, more contained. Someone nearby exhales deeply, the sound slow and steady. Another shifts, then stills. These small signals pass through the space without disruption, like gentle ripples that fade almost immediately. You're aware of them, but they don't pull you out of rest. If anything, they draw you deeper into it. You let your eyes close again, more fully this time. The darkness is no longer unfamiliar. It's comforting, held together by warmth, by presence, by the quiet understanding that this is how the day ends. Not with a clear line, but with a gradual softening. And as your body settles further into the layered bedding, supported by straw, wrapped in wool, grounded by wood, you realize something simple, but surprising. You're comfortable, not despite the simplicity. Because of it, you lie there, settled into your small pocket of warmth, and begin to notice something you didn't fully register before. The temperature is just right. Not perfectly even, not precisely controlled, but balanced in a way that feels natural. Your face catches a faint coolness from the edge of the longhouse, while your back and legs remain wrapped in steady heat from the fire and the bodies around you. It's not an accident. It's a system. Viking longhouses were designed with a kind of intuitive engineering that modern buildings sometimes overcomplicate. The central hearth radiates heat outward. while the thick wooden walls and turf roofs trap that warmth inside. The shape of the structure, long and slightly curved, helps guide airflow so smoke rises and escapes through roof vents without taking all the heat with it. In other words, they built a giant, gently heated cocoon, and now you're right in the middle of it. You shift slightly, testing the warmth again. Your feet are cozy, your shoulders relaxed. Even your hands, tucked loosely under the blanket, feel comfortably warm without becoming sweaty. That's the balance Vikings aimed for. Not overheating, but retaining enough heat to survive long, cold nights. Historians still argue whether longhouse designs varied significantly across regions or followed a fairly standardized blueprint. But excavations in places like Iceland and Denmark suggest a remarkable consistency in how heat was managed. Trial and error, refined over generations. You let out a slow breath, feeling it warm briefly against the blanket before fading into the air. The environment doesn't fight your body. It supports it, when there's no need to adjust a thermostat or flip a pillow to the cool side. Nature, and a bit of clever design, handles that for you. A soft shift nearby reminds you that you're not alone. Someone rolls slightly, pulling their covering tighter. Another person adjusts their position, turning toward the center of the room where the warmth is strongest. Even in sleep, people instinctively orient themselves toward heat. It's almost primal. You notice how close everyone is again, not in a way that feels crowded, but in a way that creates a shared thermal space. Body heat adds to the overall warmth of the longhouse, subtly increasing the temperature without any extra effort. Human insulation, not exactly a term you'll find in a modern home design magazine, but undeniably effective. A faint, art amused thought drifts through your mind. Imagine explaining to someone that your heating system includes 20 slightly snoring humans, energy efficient, questionably quiet. You adjust your blanket once more, tucking it more securely around your shoulder. The wool holds the warmth close, preventing it from escaping into the cooler air above. Beneath you, the straw and fur layers act as insulation from below, stopping the cold ground from creeping upward. Every direction is covered, top, bottom, sides. A complete thermal envelope, a quirky detail you might not expect. In some longhouses, people deliberately position themselves based on age or status to optimize warmth distribution. Elders and children, for example, might be placed in warmer zones closer to the center, while others occupied the cooler edges. Not just social structure, but temperature strategy. Historians still argue whether this placement was strictly intentional or simply evolved naturally over time. But either way, it highlights how deeply Vikings understood their environment. You take another slow breath, your chest rising and falling in an easy rhythm. There's no tension in your body now, no subtle urge to shift or adjust. You've reached that point where stillness feels natural, where movement would actually disrupt your comfort rather than improve it. And that's rare, especially for someone used to tossing and turning in search of the perfect position. Here, perfection isn't the goal. Sufficiency is. And sufficiency, it turns out, is enough. Your awareness drifts again to the fire. You don't open your eyes fully. You don't need to. You can feel it, and the gentle radiation of heat, steady and consistent, like a presence that doesn't demand attention but never disappears. It's been there all evening, and it will remain through the night. Not as a roaring blaze, but as a quiet core of warmth, a sleeping fire, just like the people around it. You notice how the air moves, barely perceptible, but present. A slight current flows from one end of the longhouse to the other, carrying warmth, dispersing smoke, keeping everything from becoming stagnant. It's subtle, but it matters. Too still and the air would feel heavy. Too active and the warmth would vanish. This balance, this constant, gentle exchange, is what makes the space livable, comfortable, even restful. You shift your head slightly, the folded cloth beneath it adjusting with a soft rustle. It holds its shape well enough, cradling your neck just enough to keep it from straining. Again, not perfect, but effective. You realize now that almost everything here follows that same principle. Nothing is excessive, nothing is wasted, just enough to create a space where the body can let go. A faint sound, someone exhaling deeply, draws your attention for a moment. It's slow, steady, almost synchronized with your own breathing. Without thinking, you match it. Inhale, exhale, and just like that, your body settles even further. It's almost meditative. No instructions, no effort, just natural alignment. Historians still argue whether Viking sleep environments contributed to overall health in ways we don't fully understand. But lying here, it's easy to imagine that this kind of balance of warmth, sound, and presence played a role, because comfort isn't just physical, it's environmental. And this environment, it's doing its job. You let your thoughts drift, no longer anchored to specific ideas. They move slowly now, like the faint currents of air above you, present but without urgency. Outside, the cold continues its quiet persistence, pressing gently against the longhouse walls. But inside you're held by heat, by structure, by the quiet presence of others sharing the same space, the same rhythm, the same slow descent into rest. And as your body sinks deeper into the layered warmth, supported from every side, you realize something almost surprising. You're not just warm, you're comfortable in a way that feels complete, not because everything is perfect, but because everything works together. You lie still, wrapped in that careful balance of warmth and quiet, and begin to notice the sounds more clearly now, not as separate interruptions, but as a soft, continuous backdrop. The longhouse doesn't go silent. It breathes. At first, it's the fire. Always the fire. A low crackle, occasional soft pops as embers shift and settle. It's quieter than before, but more consistent now, like it has found its nighttime voice. Earlier, it demanded attention. Now, it simply exists. Steady, reliable. You let your focus drift outward from that sound, and gradually, others begin to emerge. Someone exhales slowly a few feet away. Another breathes in through their nose with a faint whistle, nothing dramatic, just enough to remind you that they're there. A cloak rustles as someone adjusts their position. The wooden beams overhead respond with the occasional soft creak, as if the structure itself is settling deeper into the night. It's not silence, but it's not noise either. It's something in between, a living quiet. Historians still argue whether pre-modern sleep environments, filled with natural and human sounds, were more conducive to rest than the artificial silence many people aim for today. But lying here, it's hard not to feel that this kind of soundscape has a certain comfort to it, because nothing here is unpredictable. Nothing spikes suddenly. Everything follows a gentle, repeating rhythm, and your mind, slowly, begins to follow along. You take a deeper breath, noticing how the air feels slightly different now. Warmer near your body, cooler near your face. The faint movement of air carries subtle scents. Wood smoke, or wool, the lingering trace of food. Nothing sharp, nothing overwhelming, just layers. A quirky detail you might not expect. In some Viking settlements, the constant presence of smoke in longhouses may have subtly affected how people slept, possibly encouraging lighter, more flexible sleep patterns rather than deep, uninterrupted cycles. So if you wake up briefly later tonight, congratulations. You're historically accurate. A faint sound from outside drifts in, wind brushing against the outer walls. It's distant, softened by the thickness of the structure, but still noticeable. A reminder that beyond this warm, enclosed space, the world is cold, dark, and vast. But here you're insulated from it. You shift your fingers slightly beneath the blanket, feeling the texture of the wool. It's coarse, but familiar now. Your body has stopped questioning it, stopped comparing it to softer alternatives. This is enough. More than enough. You notice how the breathing around you has begun to synchronize, not perfectly, not in some eerie unison, but loosely aligned. A shared rhythm, rising and falling at slightly different intervals, creating a kind of layered cadence. It's almost like waves. One breath fades as another begins, a quiet, overlapping pattern that fills the space without overwhelming it. And then, there it is. The first snore. It's subtle at first, a low, uneven rumble from somewhere near the center of the longhouse. Not loud enough to disrupt the atmosphere, but distinct enough to stand out. You wait. It happens again, a little longer this time. You suppress the faint urge to laugh, because of course it does. Across time and culture, one thing remains consistent. Someone always snores, but even that doesn't feel intrusive here. It blends into the overall soundscape, becoming just another layer in the background. Another reminder that you're not alone, that this is shared. A second snore joins in from a different direction, slightly higher in pitch, less confident, but persistent. Ah, yes, a duet. You shift your head slightly, adjusting your position. For a moment, you wonder if this will bother you, if the lack of silence will keep you awake. But it doesn't, because it's not random, it's patterned, predictable, and your brain, rather than resisting it, begins to accept it, to incorporate it. The fire crackles, the wind whispers, the longhouse creaks, the breathing continues. The occasional snore punctuates the rhythm like a soft, irregular drum. It's not quiet, but it's consistent, and consistency is calming. Historians still argue whether people in Viking societies experience sleep differently due to these environmental factors. But there's growing thought that humans may actually be better suited to this kind of layered, natural sound than to complete silence. Because silence can feel empty. This feels full. You let your awareness soften again, no longer focusing on individual sounds. Instead, you take them in as a whole, a gentle, continuous presence that surrounds you without pressing in. Your breathing slows further. Inhale, exhale, each cycle longer than the last. Your body feels heavier now, not in an uncomfortable way, but in that pleasant, grounded sense that comes just before sleep. Your limbs sink slightly into the bedding, supported from below, wrapped from above. You don't need to move anymore. There's nothing left to adjust, nothing left to fix. And that realization, it's powerful. Because so often, rest feels like something you have to chase, something just out of reach. But here, it's already here, waiting. You let your thoughts drift again, but they don't travel far. They circle gently, slower each time, until they begin to dissolve altogether. A faint creak overhead, a soft exhale nearby, the steady, quiet presence of the fire. It all blends together, and without any clear moment of transition, without any sharp line between wakefulness and sleep, you feel yourself slipping just a little further. Not gone, not yet, but closer than before, carried by the quiet rhythm of the longhouse night. You drift in that soft, in-between space, aware, but only just, when a new kind of thought begins to surface. Dreams. Not the vivid, cinematic kind you're used to hearing about, but something quieter, more symbolic, more important, in a way that feels difficult to explain, but easy to sense. Because for the Vikings, sleep wasn't just rest. It was a doorway. You lie there, eyes closed, body still, listening to the steady rhythm of the longhouse, and you begin to notice how people treat this state with a certain quiet respect. No one disturbs it. No one interrupts someone who has already drifted off. There's an understanding that what happens in sleep matters. Historians still argue whether Viking beliefs about dreams were deeply spiritual across all communities or varied widely depending on region and time period. But one thing is clear. Dreams were often seen as meaningful. Messages, warnings, glimpses of something beyond the waking world. You shift slightly, the blanket moving softly with you, and let that idea settle in your mind. Imagine going to sleep not just to rest your body, but to potentially receive something, insight, guidance, maybe even a sign from the gods. No pressure, right? A faint smile flickers across your thoughts. But there's truth in it. Norse mythology is filled with references to dreams and visions. Figures like Odin, the All-Father, were associated with knowledge, wisdom, and the unseen. It was believed that the boundary between worlds, between the physical and the spiritual, could thin during sleep. And here you are, right on that edge. You listen again to the longhouse. The sounds haven't changed much, but your perception of them has. They feel further away now, softer, as if you're already stepping back from them. A quirky detail you might not expect. Some sagas describe dream women, or symbolic figures appearing during sleep, offering guidance or foretelling events. Whether these were literal beliefs or poetic storytelling devices is still debated. But either way, they highlight how seriously dreams were taken. Not just random images, but something to be considered. You take a slow breath, your chest rising gently beneath the wool blanket. The air feels thicker now, warmer, more contained. Your body has fully accepted its place here. No tension, no resistance. Just presence. And in that presence, your mind begins to loosen its grip on the structured, logical world you're used to. Thoughts become softer, less defined, more fluid. You notice how your awareness shifts, not outward, toward the room, but inward. Images begin to form faintly, not quite dreams yet, but the early stages. Fragments, impressions. A flicker of firelight becomes something else. A sound blends into a memory. You're not controlling it. You're just observing. Historians still argue whether Viking interpretations of dreams influenced decision-making in daily life. But there are accounts suggesting that important choices, journeys, battles, alliances, were sometimes guided by what someone had seen in their sleep. Imagine waking up and saying, "I had a dream, so we're going north today." And everyone just nods. Honestly, it's not that different from trusting your gut, just with a slightly more mystical presentation. You shift your hand slightly beneath the blanket, feeling the warmth gather around it. Your fingers relax, no longer curled or tense. Every part of your body seems to understand what's happening, even if your conscious mind is still catching up. You're letting go, slowly, naturally. The sounds of the longhouse continue, but they no longer feel like something you need to track. They've become background to something deeper, something internal, The fire is still there, the breathing, the occasional soft creak. But they're distant now, like echoes. You take another breath, longer this time. Inhale, exhale, and with that exhale, something shifts. Not dramatically, just enough. Your thoughts don't disappear, they soften further, losing their edges. The line between thinking and imagining begins to blur. You're no longer fully anchored in the present moment. You're drifting. A faint image crosses your mind, indistinct, fleeting. You don't try to hold on to it. There's no need. It's not about clarity. It's about movement. About letting the mind go where it wants to go. A quiet realization settles in. This is the threshold. The space Vikings may have seen as something more than just biology. A passage, a crossing point. And whether or not you believe in dream omens or messages from unseen realms, there's something undeniably powerful about this moment. Because it's the point where control fades and something else takes over. Historians still argue whether these beliefs shape the emotional experience of sleep itself, whether expecting meaning made dreams feel more vivid, more significant. But lying here now, it's easy to understand why they might have thought that way. Because this doesn't feel random. It feels intentional, even if it's not. You let your body sink a little deeper into the bedding, your muscles fully relaxed now. There's no tension left to release, no adjustment needed, just stillness, a soft, steady stillness. The longhouse continues its quiet night around you, but you're no longer fully part of it. You're somewhere just beyond, hovering at the edge of sleep. And as your awareness fades further, as the last clear thoughts dissolve into something softer, more fluid, you feel yourself drifting into that space the Vikings once regarded with quiet respect. Not just rest, but something deeper, something unseen, and maybe, just maybe, something meaningful. You drift gently along that threshold, not fully asleep, not fully awake, when a small, almost unnoticed sensation pulls your awareness back just a little. The fabric against your skin, your cloak. You hadn't really thought about it before, but now, as your body settles deeper into stillness, you become aware of how it wraps around you. Layered, slightly rough, but deeply insulating. It's not just something you wore during the day. It's part of how you sleep. Vikings didn't change into separate pajamas. What you wore is what you rested in. And surprisingly, that makes sense. You shift slightly, feeling the weight of the fabric adjust with you. The cloak covers your shoulders and part of your chest, overlapping with the wool blanket. Beneath it, your tunic remains in place, adding another thin layer between your skin and the cooler air. Layer upon layer, each one simple, each one necessary. Historians still argue whether Vikings removed outer garments before sleeping or kept them on for warmth and practicality. But in colder regions especially, it seems likely that people slept in much of what they wore, loosening or adjusting rather than removing entirely. Efficiency over ritual. No nightly wardrobe change, just adaptation. You pull the cloak slightly closer, instinctively sealing in the warmth around your neck. It responds immediately, holding heat in place, preventing that faint chill from slipping in. It's not tight, just secure, a quiet kind of comfort. You notice how the fabric smells faintly of smoke and earth, familiar scents now, no longer foreign. Earlier, they might have seemed unusual. Now, they feel grounding, like part of the environment, part of you. A quirky detail you might not expect. Wool, one of the most common Viking textiles, has natural insulating and moisture-wicking properties. It can keep you warm even when damp, making it ideal not just for clothing, but for sleeping in unpredictable conditions. In other words, you're wearing one of the most practical sleep systems ever invented. No branding required. You shift your legs slightly beneath the blanket, feeling the layers move with you. Nothing restricts your movement. The garments are loose, designed for flexibility. You can curl up, stretch out, turn onto your side without resistance. It's all built for function, and that function extends seamlessly into rest. You notice someone nearby adjusting their own cloak, pulling it over their head slightly, creating a kind of cocoon. Another person has wrapped theirs tightly around their shoulders, leaving only their face exposed. Different approaches. Same goal. Stay warm. Stay comfortable. You adjust your own position again, tucking one arm beneath your head, the other resting lightly against your side. The fabric shifts softly, settling into place without effort. No zippers, no buttons digging into your skin. Just cloth. Simple. Adaptable. Historians still argue whether specialized sleeping garments existed in certain Viking communities, but there's little evidence to suggest anything like modern nightwear was common. Most likely, people relied on their daily clothing, adjusted for comfort and temperature. And honestly, it works. You take a slow breath in, noticing how the layers of fabric trap not just heat, but a sense of stillness. There's no sudden exposure to cold air, no sharp contrast between covered and uncovered skin. Everything feels consistent, balanced. You shift your head slightly, the cloak brushing softly against your cheek. It's not silky or smooth, but it's not uncomfortable either. Just textured enough to remind you that it's there. Real. Present. The sounds of the longhouse continue in the background, but they feel even more distant now. Your focus has narrowed, not in a sharp, alert way, but in a soft, inward way. You're no longer observing the room. You're experiencing your own small space within it. Your warmth, your stillness, your breath. A faint exhale escapes your lips, slower than before. Your chest rises gently, then falls, the movement barely noticeable beneath the layers of fabric. Inhale, exhale. The rhythm continues, unforced, natural. A quiet realization settles in. You're not thinking about comfort anymore. You're feeling it, and that's different, because thinking keeps you awake. Feeling lets you drift. A soft rustle nearby, someone turning onto their other side. The fabric of their clothing shifts, then stills. No disturbance, no interruption. Just another small adjustment in a shared space. You barely register it before your awareness returns inward again. Historians still argue whether clothing choices influence sleep quality in Viking societies, but there's something undeniably effective about this layered approach. No need to transition from one state to another. You're already prepared, already adapted, already comfortable. You shift your legs slightly one last time, finding that final position where everything aligns, your back supported, your shoulders relaxed, your head resting just enough. There. That's it. No more adjustments, no more searching. Your body settles fully, the layers of cloth and wool holding you in place, not restricting, but supporting, like the longhouse itself. Structured, but flexible. Strong, but gentle. You take another slow breath, and as you exhale, you feel that familiar sensation again. That subtle slipping. That quiet release. Your thoughts fade further. Your awareness softens. The boundary between your body and the space around you begins to blur. You're no longer noticing the cloak as a separate thing. It's just part of the warmth now, part of the experience. part of the night. And as you drift deeper into that soft, steady stillness, wrapped in layers of fabric that have carried you through the day and now guide you into rest, you realize something simple, but comforting. You were already dressed for sleep all along. You barely notice the moment when your awareness loosens even further, when thoughts no longer arrive in full sentences, but in soft impressions that drift in and out like distant shapes. Time, in this space, feels different, not gone, just stretched. And as you lie there, wrapped in layers of warmth and quiet, you begin to sense something that Vikings would have understood deeply. Something shaped not by clocks or schedules, but by the slow turning of seasons. Darkness. Real darkness. Not the kind softened by street lights or glowing screens, but the kind that settles fully, completely, across the land. In the far northern regions, winter nights could stretch for long, uninterrupted hours, sometimes barely touched by daylight at all. And in those months, sleep itself changes. Historians still argue whether Viking societies followed segmented sleep patterns, resting, waking briefly, then returning to sleep, or simply adapted fluidly to extended darkness. But evidence from pre-industrial societies suggests that long nights often encouraged multiple phases of rest. Sleep wasn't a single block. It was a cycle, a rhythm that matched the world outside. You lie there now, feeling that rhythm begin to take hold, not in a conscious way, but as a quiet shift in how your body responds to the environment. There's no pressure to fall asleep quickly, no urgency to maximize efficiency, just time, plenty of it. A faint sound from outside drifts through the structure, wind moving across the land, perhaps brushing against distant trees or open ground. It's not loud, just present enough to remind you that beyond these walls, the night stretches far and wide. Cold, endless. And yet here, inside the longhouse, you are insulated from it. Not just physically, but temporally. The outside world continues, but your experience of it is softened, slowed, contained. You shift slightly, though not out of discomfort, more like a gentle repositioning, as if your body is exploring the edges of rest. The blanket adjusts with you, the cloak shifting just enough to maintain that steady warmth. No disruption, just continuation. A quirky detail you might not expect. In regions with extreme seasonal light changes, human circadian rhythms can adapt in subtle ways, becoming less rigid and more responsive to environmental cues. While Vikings didn't have scientific language for this, their lifestyles likely reflected it naturally. They didn't fight the darkness. They followed it. You take a slow breath in, your chest rising gently, then falling again. The rhythm feels deeper now, more anchored. Each breath seems to carry you a little further away from the sharp edges of wakefulness. You're not thinking about sleep anymore. You're inside it, or at least the outer layer of it. A faint memory flickers. Something about how, in pre-modern Europe, people sometimes referred to first sleep and second sleep, waking briefly in between. Historians still argue whether this pattern was common across all societies, but it suggests something interesting. Sleep wasn't always linear. It was flexible, adaptable. And lying here now, it doesn't feel strange at all. It feels natural. You notice how your body doesn't resist the idea of waking later, even briefly. There's no anxiety about it, no frustration, because there's no schedule to disrupt, no alarm waiting to pull you back. Just the long, quiet stretch of night, a shared understanding that rest will come in whatever form it needs to. You shift your head slightly, the fabric beneath it adjusting softly. Your neck feels supported, your shoulders relaxed. There's no tension left to release. You've moved beyond that phase. Now, it's just drifting. The sounds of the longhouse have softened even further. The occasional snore continues, but it feels distant now, almost absorbed into the background. The fire has settled into a low, glowing presence, its crackle reduced to a faint, steady whisper. Everything is quieter, not because it's stopped, but because you've moved deeper. Your awareness no longer reaches as far. It stays close, inward. You take another slow breath, and for a moment, you almost lose track of where you are. Not in a disorienting way, but in a gentle, dissolving way. The edges blur, the present moment stretches, and time loosens its grip. Historians still argue whether seasonal darkness influenced not just sleep patterns, but mood, behavior, and even social structures in Viking societies. But here, in this moment, it feels less like an academic question and more like a simple truth. When the world slows down, you slow down with it. You don't fight it. You don't try to stay alert or productive. You let it happen. You follow the rhythm. A faint shift nearby. Someone turning, perhaps briefly waking, then settling again. It barely registers before your awareness drifts past it. Because it doesn't matter. Nothing here demands your attention anymore. You are free to rest. Completely. Fully. Without interruption. You let your body sink a little deeper into the bedding, the layers holding you in place, not restricting, but supporting. The warmth remains steady, the air gentle, the sound soft and predictable. Everything is aligned, and in that alignment, something subtle but important happens. You stop measuring time. There's no sense of minutes passing, no tracking of how long you've been lying here. Just the quiet continuation of being, breathing, resting, drifting. And as your thoughts dissolve further, as the last traces of structured awareness fade into something softer, more fluid, you find yourself fully immersed in this slower, older rhythm. A rhythm shaped not by clocks, but by darkness, warmth, and the quiet agreement to rest when the world itself has gone still. You drift somewhere deep in that slow, quiet rhythm when a small movement nearby gently brushes the edge of your awareness. Not enough to wake you fully, just enough to notice. A soft shuffle, a faint, sleepy murmur. The subtle shift of fabric as someone turns, then settles again. You don't open your eyes. You don't need to. Because even in this half-dreaming state, you can sense what it is. Children, not separated into another room, not tucked away behind a closed door. Just here. Part of the same shared space, the same warmth, the same quiet rhythm of the longhouse. You remain still, your breathing steady, as your awareness drifts just close enough to observe, without fully returning to wakefulness. A child stirs again, closer this time. There's a small, drowsy sound, followed by the faint rustle of someone shifting beside them. An adult, most likely, adjusting instinctively, perhaps pulling a blanket closer, perhaps placing a hand gently nearby. No words, no need. The response is immediate, quiet, and practiced. Historians still argue whether Viking parenting emphasized strict structure or more fluid, communal care. But evidence suggests that children were deeply integrated into daily life from a young age. There were no separate kid zones, no isolated sleeping spaces. They learned, rested, and existed alongside everyone else. And at night, that meant sharing the same environment, the same sounds, the same warmth. You notice how the small disturbance fades almost as quickly as it appeared. The child settles. The adult stills. The rhythm of breathing resumes, blending back into the soft, layered cadence of the room. Nothing is disrupted, because this is expected, normal. A quirky detail you might not expect. In many pre-modern societies, co-sleeping was the standard rather than the exception. The idea of children sleeping alone in separate rooms is actually a relatively recent development in human history. So from a Viking perspective, modern bedtime routines might seem a little lonely. You shift slightly, not out of discomfort, but as your body adjusts within this deeper layer of rest. The blanket moves with you, the cloak settling softly around your shoulders. Everything remains aligned. You're aware now, not sharply, but gently, of the presence around you. Not as individuals, but as a collective. A shared space of rest, shared breathing, shared stillness. There's something reassuring about it. Not just the warmth, but the proximity. The quiet understanding that if something were to happen, if the wind outside grew louder, if a noise broke the pattern, you wouldn't be alone in it. Even in sleep, there is awareness. Subtle, background, a kind of quiet vigilance. Historians still argue whether Viking households maintained any form of structured night watch within longhouses or relied purely on this shared presence. But in smaller communities especially, the idea of collective awareness likely played a role. Not fully awake, but not entirely disconnected either. You take a slow breath, your chest rising gently, then falling. The rhythm continues, unbroken. Your body no longer questions the environment. It trusts it, and that trust allows you to drift deeper. Another faint sound, a child's breath, slightly uneven, then smoothing out again. You notice how quickly it blends into the overall pattern, becoming just another layer in the quiet symphony of the night. Nothing stands out for long. Everything returns to balance. You feel your thoughts soften again, pulling away from observation and back into that deeper, more fluid state. The awareness of others fades, not because they're gone, but because your mind no longer needs to track them. You're safe. That's enough. A subtle warmth spreads through your chest, not from the fire, but from that realization. From the shared presence of others who, like you, have surrendered the day and entered this quiet, collective rest. It's not something you planned, not something you prepared for, but it's there, and it's real. You shift your hand slightly beneath the blanket, your fingers brushing against the fabric, then stilling again. The movement is small, almost automatic. Your body knows what to do now. No guidance needed. A faint creak from the structure above. Just the wood settling, adjusting to the night air. It doesn't pull you back. It just passes, like everything else. Historians still argue whether this kind of communal sleeping environment shaped emotional bonds in ways we don't fully understand today. But lying here, it's easy to imagine that it did. Because even in silence, even in stillness, there's connection, not through conversation, not through action, but through presence. You don't need to see anyone. You don't need to hear them clearly. You just know they're there. And that knowing is enough to quiet something deep within you. Something that doesn't always get quieted in modern spaces. You take another slow breath, your body sinking further into the bedding, the warmth holding steady, the sounds continuing their soft, predictable pattern. Everything is as it should be. Nothing needs to change. And as your awareness fades once more, drifting gently away from the edges of thought, away from the subtle movements and quiet sounds of the longhouse. You feel yourself settling deeper into that shared rhythm. Not alone, not separate, but part of something calm, something steady, something quietly human. Somewhere in the slow unfolding of the night, your awareness drifts back just enough to notice something less comforting, but no less real. The air shifts, not dramatically, just slightly heavier, carrying a mix of scents that your mind, now softened by sleep, registers without judgment. Smoke, of course, always present, but beneath it, something else. Earth, wool, and yes, people. Because for all the warmth and quiet harmony of the longhouse, this is still a shared space filled with living, breathing bodies. There are no scented candles here, no carefully engineered ventilation systems designed for freshness. Just practicality and acceptance. You remain still, your eyes closed, your body heavy and relaxed, as this realization settles in, not as a disturbance, but as part of the environment itself. Historians still argue whether longhouse air quality significantly impacted health, especially with constant indoor fires. But evidence suggests that while smoke exposure was common, the structures were designed to manage it as best as possible through roof vents and airflow. Still, it wasn't exactly mountain air. You take a slow breath, and for a moment, you notice it more clearly. The layered scent of the space. Not unpleasant, just present, honest. A reminder that this is a lived-in environment, not a curated one. And then, just as quickly, your mind lets it go. Because it doesn't matter. Not here. A faint itch brushes your awareness. Not on your skin exactly, but somewhere at the edge of perception. You don't react, not fully. Just a subtle shift of your arm beneath the blanket. A small adjustment that happens almost without thought. A quirky detail you might not expect. Lice and other small pests were a common part of daily life in many pre-modern societies, including Viking communities. Grooming tools like combs have been found frequently in archaeological sites, suggesting that personal hygiene, while different from modern standards, was still taken seriously. So, yes, if something tiny decided to join your bedtime routine tonight, you wouldn't be the first. Historians still argue whether hygiene practices varied significantly across Viking settlements, but regular grooming, especially hair and beard care, seems to have been culturally important, even if bathing wasn't a nightly ritual. You shift slightly again, your body responding more to comfort than to awareness. The blanket adjusts, the cloak settles, and whatever minor distraction existed fades quickly into the background. Because your body is tired. And tiredness, at this level, has a way of prioritizing what matters. Warmth matters. Rest matters. Everything else becomes optional. You notice how the air, despite its layered scent, still feels breathable. Not fresh in the modern sense, but balanced. The slight movement of air through the structure prevents it from becoming overwhelming. It's enough, just like everything else here. Enough. You let your breathing deepen again, your chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. Your body no longer reacts to small discomforts. It absorbs them, adjusts, moves on. Adaptation, that's the key. A faint sound, someone shifting more noticeably this time, perhaps waking briefly. You sense the movement, the slight disruption in the pattern. But it doesn't pull you back. It passes. Everything here passes. Even discomfort. A subtle warmth spreads through your body again, not just from the fire, but from the layers of fabric, the shared heat, the enclosed space. It holds you in place, grounding you, and grounding is calming. You take another slow breath, and this time you barely notice the air itself. The scent, the weight. It's all become part of the background now, just like the sounds. Integrated, accepted. A quiet realization drifts through your mind, softer than before. Comfort doesn't mean perfection. It means balance. And here, in this longhouse, balance is everywhere. Warmth balanced with cool air, sound balanced with quiet, presence balanced with stillness. Even the less pleasant elements, smoke, scent, the occasional itch, are balanced by everything else working together. Nothing dominates, everything coexists. Historians still argue whether modern ideas of cleanliness and comfort would feel excessive or unnecessary to Viking communities. But lying here now, it's easy to see how different the baseline was. What feels unusual to you would have felt normal to them, and what feels essential to you might have seemed unnecessary. You shift your head slightly, the cloth beneath it adjusting with a soft rustle. Your neck remains supported, your shoulders relaxed. No tension returns. You've moved beyond that. Now, it's just continuation. A deeper layer of rest. The longhouse remains steady around you, its structure holding firm, its environment consistent. The fire continues its low, glowing presence. The breathing, the faint sounds, the subtle movements, they all persist, but none demand attention. They're just there, and you're here, within it, part of it. You let your thoughts dissolve further, no longer forming clear ideas, just impressions, sensations, a quiet awareness that fades in and out like distant echoes. There's nothing to fix, nothing to change, everything is already in place. And as your body sinks deeper into that balanced, imperfect, but entirely sufficient environment, you feel the last traces of wakefulness begin to loosen their grip. Not abruptly, not completely, but enough. Enough to carry you further. Into that quiet, shared darkness, where even the less comfortable parts of the night are softened by warmth, by rhythm, by the simple, steady act of letting go. Somewhere in the quiet stretch of the night, your awareness drifts upward again. Just enough to notice a subtle shift in the rhythm around you. Not a disturbance. More like a pause. The longhouse is still, wrapped in darkness and warmth. But there's a faint sense that not everyone is fully gone, not fully surrendered to sleep. You don't open your eyes, but you feel it. A quiet alertness. Not sharp, not anxious, just present. You listen carefully, your breathing slow and steady, and there it is. A slight change in movement near the far end of the longhouse. Someone shifts, not in the soft, unconscious way of sleep, but with a bit more intention. Deliberate, measured. You don't turn your head. You don't need to. Because even in this half-dreaming state, you understand. Someone is awake, or at least not fully asleep. Historians still argue whether Viking households maintained structured night watches within their homes, especially in more remote or vulnerable areas. While larger settlements may have had designated guards, smaller groups likely relied on shared awareness. Individuals waking naturally, checking their surroundings, then returning to rest. Not a formal system, but a quiet one. You sense the movement again. A soft step, carefully placed. The faint rustle of fabric. Perhaps someone tending to the fire, ensuring the embers remain alive through the night. Perhaps just a brief moment of wakefulness, a natural rise from sleep before drifting back down. It doesn't disrupt anything. It fits. A quirky detail you might not expect. In many pre-industrial societies, waking briefly during the night was completely normal. People might sit up, unadjust bedding, even speak softly for a moment before returning to sleep. It wasn't considered insomnia. It was just part of the rhythm. You feel a subtle shift in the air as someone passes nearby, not close enough to disturb you, but enough to be noticed. The movement is careful, respectful of the sleeping space. No sudden sounds, no unnecessary motion, just quiet presence. You remain still, your body heavy, your mind soft. The awareness of this movement doesn't pull you back into wakefulness. It simply adds another layer to the night, another thread in the pattern. The fire responds with a faint crackle as it's adjusted. Just a small shift of embers, perhaps a piece of wood nudged into place. The glow brightens slightly, then settles again. Maintained, not reignited. That's important. And keeping the fire alive isn't just about warmth. It's about continuity. A living connection between evening and morning, between rest and the next day's work. And someone, quietly, takes responsibility for that, without waking everyone else, without breaking the calm. Historians still argue whether this kind of subtle vigilance contributed to a greater sense of security in Viking households. But lying here now, it's easy to feel it, even in sleep. Someone is aware, not watching in a tense, guarded way, just present enough to respond if needed. You take a slow breath, your chest rising gently, then falling. The rhythm remains unbroken. Your body doesn't react with alertness. It stays relaxed, trusting the environment, trusting the quiet system in place. That trust is what allows you to drift deeper, because you don't have to be the one who listens. You don't have to stay alert. Someone else, somewhere in the room, has already taken that role, if only for a moment. And that's enough. The movement fades. The steps cease. The air settles again. Whoever was awake returns to stillness, blending back into the shared quiet of the longhouse. No announcement, no signal, just a seamless return. You barely register the exact moment it happens, because your awareness is already slipping again, drifting back down. A faint creak from the wooden beams overhead, just the structure adjusting to the night air. It doesn't pull you back. Nothing does. You're too deep now, too settled. The sounds, the warmth, the presence, they all continue, but they no longer require your attention. They simply exist around you, supporting you, holding you in place. A quiet realization drifts through your mind, softer than anything before. You're not responsible for the night. You don't have to manage it. You don't have to stay aware. You can just rest. And that realization, it's freeing. Because in your world, there's often a sense of needing to stay connected, to stay alert, to respond. But here, the night takes care of itself. Through shared presence, through quiet vigilance, through the simple act of people existing together in the same space. You shift slightly, not out of discomfort, but as your body settles even deeper into the bedding. The blanket adjusts, the cloak holds its warmth. The support beneath you remains steady. Everything is still aligned. Nothing has changed. And yet, you feel different. Softer, further away from wakefulness, and the last edges of awareness blur, no longer sharp enough to hold on to. Thoughts don't form clearly anymore. They drift, dissolve, fade before they can fully appear. You're no longer observing the night. You're inside it, fully. And as the longhouse continues its quiet, steady rhythm around you, fire glowing, breaths rising and falling, the faint memory of movement now gone, you slip just a little further, not noticing the moment, not marking the transition, just drifting, into deeper rest. You are deep enough now that time has almost disappeared. Not entirely, but enough that it no longer feels like something you can measure. There are no markers, no sense of how long you've been here. Lying in this steady warmth, surrounded by soft breathing and fading embers. Only the night remains. And within it, something quieter begins to surface. Something you wouldn't have noticed earlier, when the room was still gently alive with voices and movement. Space. Not physical space. You already know there isn't much of that. But a different kind. A subtle, unspoken arrangement that allows people to exist close together, without pressing into each other's inner world. You feel it more than you see it, even with your eyes closed. A shift in how people settle. The way bodies angle slightly away, giving just enough room. The way blankets are tucked in a way that creates small, personal boundaries within the shared environment. Invisible lines, respected without being acknowledged. Historians still argue whether privacy, as we understand it today, existed in Viking societies at all. But evidence suggests that while physical separation was limited, social awareness filled the gap. People knew how to give space, even when there wasn't much to give. You shift slightly, your body adjusting once more, and you notice how naturally you do the same, turning just enough, settling into your own small pocket within the larger space. Not isolated, but defined. A quiet sense of, this is where I rest, and no one crosses into it. Not because they're told not to, but because they understand. A quirky detail you might not expect. In shared sleeping environments like longhouses, people often developed subtle cues, body positioning, placement of belongings, even the direction they faced, to signal boundaries without words. No signs, no barriers, just awareness. You take a slow breath, your chest rising gently, then falling. The rhythm continues, unbroken. Your body is completely at ease now, no longer adjusting, no longer seeking anything. You've found your place, and within that place, something else begins to emerge. Not fully formed, not conscious, but present. A sense of quiet separation, not loneliness, just individuality within togetherness. You're part of the group, but you're also yourself. Even here, even now, historians still argue whether emotional intimacy in Viking households was shaped more by constant proximity or by these subtle forms of personal space. But lying here, it feels like both exist at the same time. Closeness and distance, shared warmth and individual rest, they don't conflict. They balance. You notice how the sounds around you have softened even further, if that's even possible. The occasional snore is now distant, almost absorbed into the fabric of the night. The fire has become a faint glow, its presence felt more than heard. Everything is quieter, not because it's gone, but because you've gone deeper. Your awareness doesn't reach as far anymore. It stays close, within your own space, your own breath. Inhale, exhale. The rhythm continues, slower now, more even. Your body feels heavier, as if it's sinking slightly into the bedding, not physically, but in that familiar way that signals you're crossing into deeper sleep. You're not holding onto the environment anymore. You're letting it hold you. A faint shift nearby, someone turning, perhaps adjusting their position, but it doesn't register the same way it would have earlier. It's not a separate event, just part of the flow. Everything blends now. Movement, stillness, sound, silence. All of it exists together, without distinction. A quiet realization drifts through your mind, softer than anything before. You don't need walls to have space. You don't need silence to feel alone. You just need balance. And here, in this longhouse, balance has been quietly present all along. You shift your head slightly, the cloth beneath it adjusting one final time. Your neck remains supported, your shoulders loose, your body completely at rest. No tension, no awareness of discomfort, just stillness. Historians still argue whether people in shared sleeping environments developed stronger internal awareness as a result of limited physical space. But there's something about this setting that encourages it. You become more attuned, not outwardly, but inwardly, to your breath, to your body, to the quiet boundary that exists between you and everything else. You take another slow breath, and as you exhale, your awareness fades even further. Thoughts no longer form. They don't even drift. They simply stop. There's nothing left to process, nothing left to observe, only sensation, warmth, stillness, presence, and even those begin to soften. The longhouse continues around you, steady, quiet, alive, but you are no longer separate from it. You are within it, part of its rhythm, part of its rest. And as the last faint traces of awareness dissolve into something deeper, something softer, you feel yourself slipping fully into that quiet, shared night. Not noticing the moment, not marking the change, just gone, into sleep. At some point, though you couldn't say when, the night carries you fully across that final threshold. There is no clear moment, no line you step over, just a soft, continuous drifting, until you are no longer aware of drifting at all. And yet, even here, deep within that quiet, layered rest, something remains. Not thought, not attention, just a faint sense of being held. The longhouse continues around you, unchanged in its slow, steady rhythm. The fire glows low at the center, its embers breathing softly beneath a layer of ash. The warmth it gives is no longer something you notice. It's something your body simply trusts. Around you, others rest in the same quiet state. Breathing rises and falls. Occasional movements pass like distant ripples, barely reaching the surface of your awareness before fading again. Everything is as it was. Everything continues, and within that continuation, you are completely at ease. Historians still argue whether sleep in Viking societies was deeper or lighter than what we experience today, shaped by environment, shared space, and natural rhythms. But lying here, if lying is even the right word anymore, it feels less like depth and more like immersion. You are not separate from rest. You are within it, a part of it, a quiet detail you might not expect. Some Viking-age graves have included bedding materials, suggesting that even in death, rest was seen as something familiar, something continuous. Not an end, but a transition into another kind of stillness. And that idea, soft as it is, seems to echo here. Because this doesn't feel like stopping. It feels like continuing in a different way. The longhouse holds its shape around you, timber beams steady overhead, walls firm against the cold beyond. The outside world remains distant, softened by layers of wood, earth, and quiet human presence. Inside, everything is contained, safe, not in a guarded sense, but in a natural one, a quiet belonging. Your breathing is slow now, deeper than before, each inhale and exhale stretching longer, softer. There is no effort in it, no awareness of needing to breathe. It simply happens. The rhythm carries on without you. A faint sound, perhaps the fire shifting, perhaps someone turning in their sleep, passes through the space, but it doesn't reach you in the same way it once did. It's not something to notice, just something that exists. And then it's gone. Historians still argue whether the communal nature of Viking sleep influenced how people experienced dreams and rest. But here, it feels less like an influence and more like a foundation. Everything supports everything else. The warmth supports the body. The presence supports the mind. The rhythm supports the transition. Nothing stands alone. And because of that, neither do you. Your body is fully relaxed now, completely surrendered to the layers beneath and around you. The straw, the fur, the wool, they hold you without pressure, without demand. Just enough. Always just enough. The cloak rests lightly against your shoulder. Its texture no longer something you feel distinctly. It has become part of the background, part of the quiet whole. Everything has softened. Edges have disappeared. Even the idea of the longhouse itself begins to fade. Not because it's gone, but because you no longer need to define it. You're not observing it. You're resting within it. A final, quiet realization drifts through, softer than anything before. This is what it means to end a day. Not abruptly, not with a clear finish, but by slowly releasing everything you were holding, until there's nothing left to carry, and nothing left to do, only rest. The fire continues its low, steady glow. The night stretches on, unmeasured. The presence of others remains, felt, but not noticed. And within it all, you drift deeper still, carried gently by a rhythm that asks nothing of you and gives everything you need. No effort, no thought, no awareness of time passing, just the quiet continuation of rest. And as that rest deepens, as the last faint connections to wakefulness dissolve completely, the longhouse holds you there. Within warmth, within stillness, within something that feels both ancient and entirely familiar. A place where the day has ended, and nothing new needs to begin. Now, as the night settles fully, and the longhouse breathes its quiet, steady rhythm around you, everything begins to soften even more. The warmth no longer feels like warmth, it simply is. The sounds no longer separate into fire, breath, or movement. They blend into a single, gentle presence. Even your body, once something you could feel distinctly, becomes lighter in your awareness, as if it has settled completely into the space beneath it. There is nothing to adjust, nothing to notice. Only a slow, steady calm. The air moves softly through the longhouse, barely perceptible, carrying with it the faintest traces of wood smoke and earth. Not something to think about, just something that exists, quietly, consistently. The fire rests at the center, its embers glowing faintly like a distant heartbeat that continues without effort. And around it, everyone remains in that same shared stillness, breathing, resting, drifting. There is no urgency here, no expectation, no need to wake, to move, to prepare for anything. The night simply continues, and you continue with it. Your breath slows even further, each inhale gentle, each exhale longer, softer, as if the space itself is guiding it. In and out. A quiet rhythm that asks nothing of you. You are not thinking anymore, not in words, not in ideas, only in soft impressions that come and go without form. Warmth, stillness, calm, and even those begin to fade, becoming something even quieter, something deeper. The longhouse, the fire, the presence of others, all of it holds steady, unchanged, as the night stretches on without measure. And you, fully at rest now, are simply carried within it. No effort, no resistance, just drifting. Further and further, until even the idea of drifting disappears. and there is only stillness, only rest, only the quiet, endless calm of a night that asks nothing from you at all.